How do you pronounce your last name?
What's your guess?
Rosen? Rosen?
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
Like Rosen and at the end.
Awesome.
I get called Rosen, which is the bag that's by the baseball mound.
Right.
I get called Rosenberg.
Rosenberg.
They add some extra syllables on there, huh?
I just added on there.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you you joining the podcast. Is there anything that's off topic that you don't want us to ask you about personally?
Never.
Okay. All right. Cool.
That's a good way to do things. Huh?
Well, Mike,
if you ask me something that's off topic and I think I can't answer it, I'll just answer what I want to answer.
we love it.
That's perfect.
That's what we do too. Well,
Best way to go.
we appreciate
I was
you.
going to wear my Dodgers 2020 World Champion shirt, but decided that was pushing it.
Yeah, I know, man. I would have fought you virtually for that. I was surprised. I've watched a couple of your podcasts, and you always had the Dodger Stadium background, or you're on the beach in Hawaii. So I'm guessing you're in a hotel room, or is that your office?
No, this is my office.
Okay, all right.
And I'm not in a hotel room in Hawaii. I'm looking out my back door.
In Hawaii.
In Hawaii.
Not in Hawaii. If I could swivel this around, you'd see that I have like every single baseball card from the 1959 Dodgers. I've got all sorts of Dodger autographs and stuff that I've had over years.
So you've been waiting a long time, huh?
Yeah. I don't miss a game, by the way. I watch every single game.
Oh, you're a big fan.
You never missed one.
Last year I missed none. I mean, I counted as at least seeing 3 innings live. This year I haven't missed any either.
That's amazing. That's
great.
kind of amazing.
Yeah, he's a big fan. We appreciate you joining, Mike. How did you find his videos?
So oddly enough, I was taking we're taking classes late in life, and I was taking a human systems engineering class, and the teacher referenced one of your videos, and I watched it, ended up sending it to John. And I was like, we got to talk to this guy. We always talk about how electronics and things are affecting our lives, and there was a TED Talk that you were talking, and just beautifully spoken, and we wanted to see if we can get you on. So that's how we came about.
It's we so I have children, and I see like I always say, like, I'm in a constant battle because I want to let my kids use the technology because I want them to be familiar with it, and I don't want them to feel like we're shutting them out when their friends are all on the devices. But I also want them to grow up how we grew up, going outside, getting sunlight, playing, being kids. But it's like a delicate balance. So when you were talking about how it is affecting our memory, our mood, and our anxiety, I was obsessed. I went down the wormhole on a lot of your videos. So I'm curious what the numbers are. The last video I watched, you said that people in the high school range and in college check their phones about 75 times a day, and they stay on there about 250 minutes a day.
Way more than that now.
What is it at now?
I forget the exact numbers, but it's something like about 100 times a day and about 6 hours plus.
Oh my God, that's insane. So what is that doing to our brains and our society long term? I mean, what is that ultimately going to do?
Well, there's a lot of concerns. One is that we have a short attention span. And the technology just makes us have a short attention span. I mean, there's always something different. And when you watch a YouTube video, on the side, there's all the videos that you should watch next. And our attention span has dramatically decreased over the last decade or so. All of us, not just kids. I mean, for kids, I get a lot of concern about the fact that they are not, like you said, they're not going outside. They spend like a half hour a day exercising, doing things that they should do that would make them, better being outside. But they also get hooked on whatever it is they're using. And so my grandkids who are 10 and 9 get hooked on iPads and gaming on iPads. And given the choice, 24/7, they would just have their iPads out 24/7 and they would be gaming. So whether their parents will set rules or not, or guidelines, we do when they're here. So the guidelines are you can play, we'll negotiate the time. Usually we end up with 15 to 30 minutes or something like that. But we negotiate, let them feel like they want a little bit. And then when the alarm set goes off, they have 2 minutes to close down whatever, because I know you can't just close down in the middle of a game. You want to get to a place where you can restart some of the games. And then they have to have, we negotiate how much time they have to have when we go outside, or we talk, or we're binge watching Young Sheldon with them. So, we do that. Anything to get them off of the interactive technology, which more and more they play with their friends. And one of the crazy statistics is that 31.1% of teenagers will have an episode of an anxiety attack during their teen years.
Wow.
That's almost a third.
Wow.
That just is very scary, quite honestly. Are we recording, by the way?
Yes. Yeah. We're recording.
You should be.
Yes. Yeah. No, this is good. We like to
say in the upper corner we're recording.
Yeah. We don't like to say, all right, now we're beginning. We like to just flow into it.
From a psychological standpoint. But I was going to say, before we get too far, could you kind of briefly introduce yourself and what your background is, just so the viewers and listeners can get a little bit of that?
Sure. My name is Larry Rosen. Sometimes I go by Dr. Rosen, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I go by Dad, Grandpa, whatever. I am a retired research psychologist. I taught and did research for 45 years, and I still do research. I just don't teach anymore. All of my work since the 80s has been on the psychological impact of technology, or what we call the psychology of technology. And we started 1983, I think, even before there were laptops, or even people thought about laptops, let alone phones. And we looked at what was called computer phobia back then, which is kind of funny to say. But then that morphed into technophobia. We talked a lot about how adults couldn't figure out how to program their VCRs, so it just flashed 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock all the time, way back then. And we've just kind of gone over the years to looking at more and more issues that surround technology. I love to just keep studying different things. And so when my kids started playing video games, I studied video games. When I started doing online dating, I studied online dating. So it kind of goes along with my own personal beliefs that whatever is interesting to my kids must be interesting to everybody. I am, what else to say? I'm 72 and a devout research scientist. I look at the world through scientific lenses. I don't have any other choice. My undergraduate degree was in math. My graduate degree was in research psychology. I have no choice but to be a scientist. So I even look at things like diseases or symptoms and things like that, and look it up but when I look it up, I don't just look up what somebody says on some website. I go to Google Scholar and I start looking at the research. And I love reading research, because most people, when they quote research in magazines and newspapers and stuff, they don't misquote them, they overquote them. They often will tell you a result that, yeah, that's fine, but notice that there's only 9 people that they studied, or notice that they did this supposed long-term study and it was only 2 months. So
yeah,
I'm a scientific skeptic, I guess I would say, and then that always fits into what I've been doing. And then over the time, starting in the 80s, I wrote 7 books on different aspects of technology, ranging from just generic technostress, we call it way back then, to how to parent kids in this sort of new generation of technology users, how to shape education to take advantage of it, how to look at distraction. That was our latest one, distraction. How to look at psychological disorders that came from technology. So it's been very, very interesting career. I've loved it. And I still think I have a lot to offer about it, because I sort of try to keep up with the world. And it's easy when you have 4 kids and 6 grandkids, ranging from I think my oldest son is 47 today.
That's awesome.
He is also a diehard Dodger fan too.
I'm curious.
By choice, right?
Yeah, by choice. Yeah, all his choice.
No, not by choice. Either mine isn't either. My father grew up in Brooklyn. What choice did I have?
Yeah. I'm curious what your studies and your research looked like in the 80s. What were you, because I mean, I'm thinking there was radio and then there was TV. So what was your research looking like back then?
So if you remember how the 80s kind of evolved, the beginning of the 80s, we were still dealing with large computers behind closed doors and people with pencils sticking out of their pocket. But shortly thereafter, we ended up starting to get desktop computers. And if you remember that Apple's ad for the Macintosh in 1984, that's kind of the mark of changing over. And we did a lot of research back then, literally on computer phobia, how much anxiety people had about this change that was going to happen, and where their anxiety was, what were they anxious about. We actually ran a clinic way back then on how to treat them to get rid of their anxiety, which was eye-opening and interesting, because there were so many people who, even at that point, were stressed about the coming of technology. They really didn't want it in their classes. I taught a class where the first day I said, "Oh, this is great. We're not going to have to do statistics by hand. You're going to come take over the computer center, show you how to punch cards." That's how old I am. And then we're gonna have the computer do all the statistics for you. And the first day of class, I had 30 students, and the second day I had 15. And I asked them to a person, they were just, "No, I don't want to do this. I'm a little afraid of these machines." And then it's kind of evolved. And then at the end of the 80s, by then it was like everywhere.
Listening to you talk, the anxiety of, the anxiety that was felt then must have been more of, because I don't know how to use this technology, to where now the anxieties, I feel maybe it's more of them needing the dopamine rush from the likes on social media, or if they're not getting enough likes, or if they are not near their phone to check it. Like, the anxiety is shifted to probably something that's a worse type of anxiety. Is that accurate, or what do you think?
Yeah, it's funny. Way back when we started studying it, the anxiety was more about sort of societal issues. What's society going to look like? We had movies taking over, computers taking over the world, and people were genuinely afraid of what was going to come in the future. Now, and I look at now, maybe stretching back to 10, 12 years ago, when the iPhones kind of rushed in and took over the world, and then everybody had phones and everybody had technology on them. And the anxiety comes from a lot of different places. One place that's really obvious is social media. People behind a screen, people can say really nasty things, and they do. And they think just because they're behind a screen, this nice screen that's in front of me, that nobody knows who they are. They can sort of feel anonymous, but they're not really anonymous. I mean, anybody can look them up and find out all about them if they want. And so people constantly are feeling upset and scared and worried about these people on social media. But then there's also this thing called fear of missing out, that if you're not there on social media, then you're going to miss out on stuff. And so that's just kind of the opposite look. So it's really, there's no main source of anxiety. I mean, there's even people who feel anxious about keeping up. Do I get the next phone? Do I keep up with the technology? Do I keep trying every app that comes out? And that makes them anxious, because then they figure, well, I gotta be doing this, I gotta be doing that, I gotta be doing this. I mean, and then all the sorts of communication issues make people anxious. I love when people text somebody and then they look at the little dots at the bottom and sit there and wait and wait and wait and wait, and then they disappear. I go, wait a minute, what was the person going to say? I want to hear it, even if it's bad. I want to hear it. And so it's kind of a mishmash of everything you can think of. Obviously, video gaming, has changed dramatically. My grandsons, like I said, who are 10 and 9, play almost always online with other people, or interesting enough, watch other people online playing online, which I find an interesting phenomenon. I used to think, when I started, I used to think, that's really weird. Why would you want to sit and watch somebody else playing a game? But then I realized that what they're doing is developing good strategies. They're figuring out things that this other person is showing them, and they're using that to help them learn how to get deeper into the game. So anxiety is tricky, but I think it hits us all really hard. And I think technology usually underlies what's going on.
It's amazing how you can learn things at a faster rate, watching, in that class I was talking about where we went over mirror neurons and not actually having to do something, but watching, and you're developing skills by just watching. That you would have never thought that was a thing to watch people play video games, because it's like, I don't know, to me, it's like watching golf. It's not that interesting to me. But, you mentioned... Well, yeah, paint dry, exactly. Some of the games I watch my buddy play or watch my buddy watch, I'm watching him watch something, like card games, and I'm like, how do you watch this for hours? But you mentioned FOMO, or fear of missing out. Was that a thing in psychology before, and this is like the new term for an already developed thing?
No, people. I mean, yes, there were people who studied people who were concerned that they were missing out on things, but it really didn't hit until social media took off. And social media created, even the beginning social media sites created this thing of, if you weren't there, you weren't, period. Or if you were sharing something online with somebody and you didn't take a picture, it didn't exist. And so all of that really changed the kind of zeitgeist of the world in terms of technology. And what it did is it made everybody feel like they had to be there 24/7. And interesting story, my youngest daughter and I went on a car trip, mostly because she just had surgery and I wouldn't let her drive, so I took the car and drove. But one of the things that we did is we hiked up to some place called Inspiration Point. I don't even remember, somewhere in the upper west part of the country. And here we are, and she's on crutches, and she's going all the way up, and I'm going all the way up. We get to the top, and of course, Inspiration Point obviously is going to be inspiring, right? It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be interesting. Turned out there was a cell tower up there, and every single person except us were on their phones. They felt like they missed out on something that, it took them 20 minutes to climb up there, and they missed out on 20 minutes worth of the world.
That's insane.
It's a little frightening.
That's scary.
But it's also... I find it that if you can figure out what's going wrong, or you can figure out what is wrong, then it's easier to figure out what you can do about it. And I think a lot of it with kids is simply parenting. Quite honestly, when I was a kid, I got stuck in front of the TV on Saturday mornings because my parents wanted to sleep in. When my kids were kids, they got stuck in front of the TV every day in the morning because I wanted to sleep in. Now, you just stick them in front of an iPad and it's different. If you think about it, watching TV is a very passive activity. Playing a game is a very active activity. And in general, you're building up this kind of this internal feeling that if you're not on and you're not there all the time, that someone's missing you, or you're missing out on something, or something's going on that you should have known about. And now that there's just an explosion of social media sites, it's even worse. The average teenager has an active presence on 6 social media sites. And by active presence, I mean they at least check it once a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And in fact, when we look at, I did a study with some millennials and teenagers both. And what I did is every week, I had them send in a screenshot of their 7-day screen time on their iPhone. And then we literally hand looked at those and what they were doing and how many, if you have iPhone, that screen time shows you the app that you used and how many minutes you used it in the last week and what notifications you got and where they came from. What was the first app you looked at when you opened your phone, things like that. It gives you lots of information. turns out that the majority of their time, both millennials and teens, is spent connecting. And number 1, 2, 3, and 4 usually are iMessage. And then depending upon what the flavor is of the day, like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they're all like numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And when you add it all up, that's really what they're doing, is communicating. But they're not communicating face to face. I mean, even on Zoom, I can see your face is not, it's not like it's perfect, but it's better than if you're playing a game and you don't see anybody's faces out there. You're still communicating, but you're missing out on all the cues. I mean, if I were talking to somebody on Zoom, I would miss out on the cues that they were showing me unless I had them huge on my screen. I could really get into their face, and peer at that.
Yeah.
But there's so many cues in communication that we don't get online, we don't get virtually, that it really messes up communication. And I don't know if you're a Key and Peele fan, but there was a great episode of miscommunication with text messages between them. And if you get a chance to check it out on YouTube, it's just, they're hysterical anyway, but it just showed you how one little miscommunication can end up with somebody coming at you with a bat with nails in it. That's the ending result of all this. So it is about communication. And with communication, you've got so many ways to communicate. Of course, you're worried about missing out. I don't like the idea of fear of missing out. It just happened to be a great acronym that people made up. It's really anxiety about missing out. But AOMA doesn't sound very good. FOMO sounds better.
Yeah,
it does. And I think we always had something like that. Like if you were in a baseball league and you missed the game, it's like, man, I wish I was there. But it's like, everybody knows there's so many events now, but back in the day it was, baseball or going to the mall. And if you didn't go, you cry about it or whatever. But, taking this class that I took and learning more about psychology, I'm really glad that I did, because there's a lot of principles I can apply to parenting. And I know that you touched on a few, but what are some things that you could, with what in the science and everything you've went over, what have you applied to your own parenting that you think others should know?
So there's a lot, but it all boils down to good parenting is about setting limits and boundaries, period. End of discussion. Now, diving deeper into that, it's about setting up boundaries on behavior. But it has to be a two-way street. So just to give you an example, my oldest grandson and his mom were having troubles, and he was calling her names, and she was upset. And so we sat down, the three of us, and we talked about what kind of names upset her the most. Called her some pretty nasty stuff too. And I listed them down, and I asked her then, what's the one that hurts you the most? And she pointed to one, and I said, so if you were going to take away him being able to play on his iPad, which is what kind of the typical way of controlling behavior, how long do you think it should be gone? And she, of course, said a day. And he blanched. And so we negotiated back and forth, and we ended up at an hour. And then we negotiated the other words down to 20 minutes. Both were happy. A week and a half later, it's all going great. That doesn't mean it's not going to fall apart, which it often does. But the idea of setting those clear limits says, I'm the parent, I set the limits, you follow the limits, you get good things happening to you. And it's parenting, while parenting is difficult, I don't find that it's rocket science. I find that parents do the wrong things sometimes, like allowing their kids to have phones at dinner. That should definitely be a time for conversation. Allowing their kids to just play endlessly on games rather than sending them outside, do things, go play with your friends. One of the other things that's interesting is when you get down to the little kids, because I think this is where it starts. What you want to do is set very clear objectives. Like, for example, if I were working with a parent of an 8-year-old, I would say, well, what would you like that 8-year-old to do for you? Well, I want him to get up in the morning and get himself dressed. Okay, we write that down. Get up in the morning and get yourself dressed. I would like him to brush his teeth at night before he went to bed. Brush his teeth before he went to bed. And then you create this little chart, and I fondly remember my kids going through school and had star charts where they got stars for good behavior on the wall of the classroom. That's what this is, except you go buy some fancy little stars. Every time they have a good behavior, you put a star on there, or they put a star on there. They feel good, gave lots of positive comments. When they don't do something right, you don't yell at them, because that's the natural thing, is to yell at them and tell them, go back and brush your teeth, damn it. You just say, hey, I'm sorry you didn't brush your teeth this morning. We'll do it. See if you can do it tomorrow. And what happens is when you set then consequences for those good behaviors, like if you get 5 stars, you can get X. If you can get 10 stars, you get to buy 10 more minutes of game time today. Anything that you can figure out that they want, you can make kids do anything. And you have strong behavior. I always had my kids on a star chart when they were young. And what's fascinating is they really hardly ever turned them in for anything. What they did is collected them because they were fighting over who had the most stars.
That's good.
That's when it's powerful, though. You know that you really got their attention.
Yeah.
Weird question, but did you ever experiment with shaping?
Like shaping behavior?
Yeah. Like, yeah. The old theory of like clicking something, or, more for animals, but I thought that was fascinating. I don't know how far you can go with shaping, but what did you do with that?
Well, with kids, you are kind of shaping their behavior. You're kind of incrementally trying to get to a step to a place where you want to be as a parent of a child. And you can't just go from 0 to 100 immediately. So just like my daughter-in-law wanted a whole day lost, he wanted 5 minutes lost. We shaped that behavior into a position that made everybody happy, and then watched his behavior. If his behavior was not going well, then you have to go back down and back off a little. But if his behavior is going the way you want it to go, then incrementally you increase it. And you keep increasing it. So now you have, before maybe you had to go, get off the game in 2 minutes. Now you make it 1 minute. Meaning what you want to shoot for is when I say time's up, when the bells, alarms go off, time's up, please shut your computer off, or your iPad or whatever. That's the goal, is to get it to that. And you shape people, because you can't just go from 0 to 100. It just doesn't work. Or in parenting, you can't go from 100 to 0, which is, when I was a kid, a teenager particularly, I was grounded for life so many times I can't even remember. Now, obviously, I'm standing here. I'm not grounded unless my mother's in the back.
Are you sure?
Maybe, I don't know. But again, I was never grounded for life. And it turned out to be kind of an idle threat. And I think a lot of what happens with parenting right now is that it's kind of a lot of idle threats because they don't know what to do. And I've worked with parents of like 5-year-olds up to parents of 80-year-olds, people, just people who are just abusing their technology use in a way that's hurting them and hurting the people around them. And the most common, of course, is working with teenagers, because that's where it's really at right now.
I have two. I have a set of twins, a boy and a girl, and they're 3. And I'm reading, I don't know if you're a fan of Jordan Peterson or not, but I'm reading his book right now, The 12 Rules to Success, or to Life. And you mentioned something that correlates in the book of how you speak to your children, instead of like my words before I started reading this book. If they're climbing on something, I said, "Oh no, don't fall," that kind of thing. Like, get off before you fall. And now I've been adjusting my words of, "Hey, be careful up there. Watch out. Watch your step while you're on this," or something. Not highlighting the negative, I guess. And I don't know, what that does psychologically, but he said it works, so I wanted to start implementing it. So what does that do to their brains, or what does that do long-term for them?
So I would add one more thing to that,
okay,
which is when they reach where they want to go, big applause, good job, great job. Do you need any help getting down? You okay with that? So you, on the one hand, you're not being punitive, but you're being cautious, which is fine. Everybody should be cautious, I think. But you're also being positive. And that's where I think parenting really is positive reinforcement. You reinforce the behaviors that you want. The other ones will either disappear because you don't reinforce them, or you have to punish them sometimes by taking away the iPad for 20 minutes. But I think the key component that parents don't do often enough is reinforcement. And reinforcement doesn't have to be like, I mean, a lot of parents say, well, if you do good on this test, I'll take you to Disneyland. No, that doesn't work. Big reinforcements don't work. The best reinforcements cost nothing. Their time with the parent, their nice words, their hugs, all of those for kids and adults, quite honestly, are the best reinforcements. And so it doesn't cost you anything to do this. You just have to remember that anytime your kids do something great or positive, something you like, you say, great job, or give them a hug or whatever. Like my grandkids get off the iPad now immediately, and I go and hug them both and say, God, you guys are great. I remember days when we used to have to fight over this. We don't have to fight anymore, guys. Hey, let's go out and throw the football around.
That's awesome.
What do you think about negative reinforcement in the sense of not removing something, but more of a nagging? Because there is that one, but that one's kind of like the more negative way to do it. But like, yeah, like kind of like, you know what the nagging is like, well, you're just not going to do that. You're just not going to do that. And then they're going to want to do that. What do you think that's a effective tool too? And when would you implement that one?
I think that honest to goodness, there really are only two tools that I would use. And one is positive reinforcement and one is punishment. The other is negative reinforcement. Extinction is another thing you can do with just letting things kind of, ignoring it and letting it go away naturally. None of those work. Consequences. Good consequences make behavior go better. Bad consequences will make behavior go down. Period. Easy. And when I work with parents, it's like I'll watch them for a while and I'll say, that was a great time when you could have said, Jimmy, that was great that when blah 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 that you did this. They just miss out on that, and part of it is, I think, being a parent for so many years and being a grandparent too. It's like when your kids are quiet and calm and doing things, doesn't matter to you as a parent what they're doing. You're happy they're quiet, meaning you can do what you want. You get free time for a while, which is why, of course, you can let kids play on an iPad forever because it's, again, parental downtime. And, you get to work. And the pandemic screwed that all up too with, kids having to be at home and having the parent work at home. It just messed everything up. Now I can see we're just starting to maybe turn a corner and get back to normal parenting, but it's still, I don't think it'll be back until the pandemic slows down, if it ever does. But I really do, honest to goodness, think that if you just shower them with positive reinforcement when they do something positive, and you mildly punish them when they do something that you don't want them to do, you'll have great kids in a month.
In a month. All right. I have kids first though.
Yeah, right.
John has kids. I don't have kids yet, but I'm liking the tools and I'm learning to in the future implement. You touched on COVID. I'm actually interested. Have you done any research on the long-term effects of COVID and like moving schools totally, digital and like work? People are starting to work from home. Have you looked at any of that long-term effects of how that's going to impact the world?
I haven't looked personally at the long-term effects, but there is a decent amount of work starting to come out. And I say starting to because in my field, you write up a journal article and you submit it, and then a year and a half or 2 years later, you might see it in print. Some of them put them online first, and so maybe in 6 months you'll see it online. But then the pandemic is in a totally different state anyway. So one of the things that I did do during the pandemic is to try to see if we could get kids to spend less time on their devices. Granted that they had to spend a certain amount of time for school, less time in general on their devices. And we were mostly working them with high school seniors, and then millennials, and like kind of 25-year-olds, basically in that range. And what we did is we did 2 studies. The first one, I gave them a whole long list of things that they could do. I think there were 21 things they could do to help them wean themselves off, particularly off their phone. Like, for example, since social media is so big, one of them was take each of your social media icons, put it in a folder, move all those folders to another page, sprinkle them around, hide them. And then when you open your phone, I mean, I had people actually describe to me when they opened their phone what they saw. Almost everything was communication. I mean, they had TikTok on there, Instagram, Facebook, Messenger, all of these things on the front page. And so how can you not go, oh, I'll tap that one. Ooh, I'll tap that one. But if you move them out, potentially you have to go search for them. And then maybe during that search for them, go, oh, what do I really need to do this for? We had a bunch of things help their attention, increase their attention and focus. We let them pick 2, any 2 they wanted, and they did them for 3 weeks. And during the 3 weeks, we had them send in we had a program that monitored how many times they unlocked their phone and how many minutes they spent on their phone. And if you can look at this, here's the baseline. Here's how they're doing without my intervention. Now I put in the strategies. For 3 weeks, the baseline goes down a little, meaning they're checking in less often and they're spending less time. And at the end of the 3 weeks, it goes back up way above where it was before, meaning they're trying to catch up on it. So I thought, well, that's fine. We gave them too many choices. And so we just did 2 choices. You have to use these both. There is no choice here. And we did it for 6 weeks. Found exactly the same thing. During the 6 weeks, they reduced their behavior on their phone a bit. But after the 6 weeks, it either reverted to their norm, or even got higher. So really, it's funny. I always think about this stuff, and I'm just as bad as anybody is, by the way. I don't even look when Screen Time tells me what my screen time was, because it's baseball season and I'm always on the phone watching the game. But that doesn't count. I can track those out, I think. But these devices are incredibly attractive. And in being attractive, 2 things can happen. One, you can get addicted to it, which you talked about dopamine before. That's really addiction, is you keep having to do something more and more to get more and more dopamine to feel better. But you have to keep doing more and get more, because dopamine kind of has a level effect. And if you don't get enough dopamine, then you don't feel like it was worth it. So you need to play longer if it's a game, or you need to talk more online, or whatever it is. But then the other part is obsession. And I'm much more interested in obsession, because obsession is an anxiety-based disorder. I mean, we all know what OCD is, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder. Well, obsession, both parts of those are anxiety-based. You become obsessed because there's anxiety chemicals in your body. And it's really interesting what you can find biochemically. And since you took this class, I'll tell you a little study that was done. I didn't do it, somebody else, I forget who. But they went into a home that had a mother, a father, and a teenage child. That was it. So they found, I think, 50 or 60 groups. And at specific times, they had to take a swab, put it in their mouth, put it in a test tube, cover it up, date and time, stick it in the refrigerator. And they did that. And the important ones were the beginning of their day and what happened. So before they started this study, they had them fill out a couple of diaries of how much time they were spending on each website per day, what they were doing with their technology, did they spend email, whatever. And then what was interesting is they took a swab when they woke up immediately, and they measured the level of cortisol. Cortisol is one of the main chemicals in the anxiety network. And then 30 minutes later, they measured cortisol again. So what they were interested in doing was first seeing, did the cortisol jump? And of course it did. It did. But for moms, there was nothing that correlated with that jump. For dads, it turned out the dads who used more email had a bigger rise in cortisol. Well, if you're a dad and you're in business, you probably get up in the morning and you first have to deal with all of the emails you got from your boss and everybody in your work and everything this is your morning, so you jump on. For the teenager, the only correlation was those who had more time on social media. The more time on social media, the more the cortisol increased over the 30-minute wake up time. That's powerful.
Yeah. No,
it's actually frighteningly powerful.
Yeah, that's scary. The iPhone came out in 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that.
There was a couple of years where there wasn't social media, like an app for social media, right? Mm-hmm. So during that time, did we have high anxiety rates whenever, because I remember when I got the BlackBerry and I had to go to like www.com, MySpace, to log into MySpace on my phone. Mm-hmm. But I think it changed completely whenever we got the apps that we can download, and it's just more easily accessible. Did it change from what? It's not the phone's fault. Like, I think the driver's social media, right?
It's the main driver, sure.
Right.
And I think what you just said was perfect, because when the iPhone came out, it came out slowly. Like most technologies, it kind of gets through into society slowly, but then it just boom took off. And in fact, the BlackBerry was never the same. I had a BlackBerry too. It's like, who needs this BlackBerry? I have to type things.
Yeah, garbage.
I can tap things on the screen. Yeah. Then what happened is, as the iPhone kind of took off, the world got murkier. And what really turned it around completely was MySpace. I don't know if you remember MySpace at the beginning, but MySpace was at its prime was adding 250,000 people a day. And everybody was on MySpace.
Yeah.
I mean, wasn't it fighting to be in the top 8? Hey, why didn't you be in your top 8? So then they went to the top 16.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, why did I get 15? Tell me, why am I number 15 on your friends list? But it also was multimedia, and that's what attracted a lot of young people. It was all the music you could play on there, the backgrounds you could do. When Facebook came out, Facebook looked like a stripped down version of MySpace.
Yeah.
And everybody loved it because they didn't have to spend all this time waiting for music and all this stuff. They just got on, and the whole emphasis was on the wall. What was on the wall? And so you reacted to that. And now we're kind of back to the multimedia part.
Yep.
We're back to a lot of videos. We're back to a lot of more less English writing and more video, audio experiences, I guess is the right word. And who knows where that's going. And I don't do a lot of social media myself, but I like to lurk and watch. And it is interesting how quickly things take off if they have something unique to add. Like Instagram is one of my favorite examples. Instagram took off because it was visual. It was essentially pictures. And that's why it took off, because there wasn't a lot of pictures on Facebook, and there wasn't really anything else. I mean, MySpace was gone, Friendster was gone, all those early ones were gone. And then as you started adding more sophisticated social media, you got into stories, you got into videos, you got into live streaming, which is now incredibly popular, live streaming. And everybody's got a camera and everybody's watching everything and taking video of it. But that's because you can, and particularly through social media, it's the best way to do it. So social media started this all, and it is evolving it all too. There's really nothing else going on but social media, quite honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there are people who don't do social media at all. But if you look at the lump of people in the years like from 12 to 25 or 30 range, even longer, you see that primarily they're spending all their time on social media, and primarily that's their focus.
I forgot about the friend list on MySpace.
Oh yeah, that was a big.
That was like you had to have a conversation with your friend. Like,
that's a point of contention. Yeah.
Hey, what's going on? Why am I 2?
Why is Jimmy 1?
I thought that was kind of cool, and I thought it was really cool how we learned coding really early on to make our pages and to put a YouTube video up and then do a questionnaire. Yeah. I thought it was more personal, but I wanted to circle back at that study you were talking about, the swabs at certain times of the day.
Mm-hmm.
With social media, we get on at certain times. So are you saying that if we don't get on at that certain time, or it's nearing that certain time, the cortisol starts to come upon? And or is it like whenever we're not getting dopamine and we have such a habit of being on social media that cortisol gets introduced? Or
I think in this part, the dopamine doesn't really come into play.
Okay.
Unless you're getting a lot of pleasure out of your communications, and then it does play into it, obviously, because you need more and more. And online dating is my favorite example of that. It's like you go online and you do it for a while, and then you find it's really fun and enjoyable. So you do more and get more dopamine, but then you have to do it more and more and more and more and more, and it gets crazy. But let's see if I can frame this right. Cortisol is a critical chemical. When you wake up in the morning and you look outside and you see the sun and the blue skies, your body starts releasing cortisol, and little amounts, because that wakes you up. Cortisol is required. It wakes you up. As the day goes on, if you're not anxious at all, the cortisol stays at a level that keeps you awake and focusing and stuff. When you look at devices, every single device now is LED based, and they all emit light in the whole spectrum. But particularly if you look at the light in the blue spectrum, and everybody thinks when you look at your phone that it's white, the background's white. It's not. It's a bluish white. If you look at blue light, what it does is it starts to shut down other systems and increase the cortisol. So when do we mostly look at our phones right in our face, or our iPads right in our face? Well, at night when we're going to bed, right? Everybody takes their phone to bed. Everybody's flipping through, looking at stuff, with their multitasking. So what the cortisol does, first of all, back up, the way you fall asleep is through melatonin. And the pineal gland starts leaking melatonin as you get to the end of your day, slowly leaks it, slowly gets in until it builds up to enough melatonin that you get tired and go to sleep. Cortisol shuts that off and increases the blue light makes cortisol, and cortisol shuts that off. So what's happening is you're now messing with your sleep biochemically. And what's interesting to me about that is it doesn't necessarily mean you have trouble falling asleep. It means you have trouble getting good sleep. You wake up a lot. You have difficulty getting up in the morning because you didn't get good sleep. And good sleep means you got enough REM time, enough dreaming time in there, and that your brain went through its kind of cleansing functions while you're sleeping, which it does a lot, by the way. The brain goes through all sorts of stuff at night while you're sleeping. It actually acts a little bit like a bidet, because during the day when you're thinking and doing things, your brain uses some neurons, but then there's junk. There's atoms that it throws out there and other junk and pieces. And if you let that stuff stay there, it turns into plaque, which is just a bunch of those squeezed together. And when you look at people who have Alzheimer's and you look at their brains, they have a lot of plaque in it. So what the brain does naturally is it literally takes spinal fluid while you're sleeping. It takes spinal fluid, gets it up into your brain and kind of washes it out like a bidet and flushes it down into your system. If you don't get a good night's sleep, that doesn't happen. It doesn't get rid of all of them, and then they start turning into plaque, and then you have trouble thinking and remembering and doing. And so it's critical, but technology just makes it horribly impossible to get a good night's sleep and to have all these processes go around in the back.
For John's sake, does the plaque go away if you catch up?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes and no. And the answer is, partially the answer is we really don't know, because the way we know that plaque is a problem for Alzheimer's is people die and we dissect their brains and look at the plaque. We have yet to be able to look at it on a kind of continuous basis from when you're young, except now. There's a big project with thousands and thousands of subjects called the ABCD project. It's like 12 universities and like 30,000 subjects. And they started they took 10-year-old kids, a couple started about 4 years ago, I think. Took 10-year-old kids. They brought them into the lab. They asked them a bunch of questions, and a lot of questions about their technology use, how much they used it, how much time, what they used. And then every year they came back in, they gave them more paper and pencil stuff, but they also scanned their brains every year with an MRI. And what they found, which is interesting, the first thing they found, and they're doing all sorts of interesting stuff, but when you looked at those 10-year-olds who spent more time with screens, with whatever kind of screens, that they showed a thinning of the cortex. Mm. Now, the cortex naturally thins over time, but not at 11 years old. It thins over time as you get into like teenage years and later. And we don't really know what it means that it thins prematurely, because it's kind of like the cortex of a 11-year-old now looks like the cortex of an 18-year-old. And what does that do in their brains? We don't know yet. That's why this study is still going on and will be going on for at least 10 more years. So it's tricky. It's just tricky, bottom line.
In a speech you were doing, I recall you giving some tips and advice for ways to, I guess, reset your brain, if I'm not mistaken. So walking outside for 5 minutes, I think you said, kind of doing some meditation, some deep breathing. I'm curious if you've looked at like sauna use and cold plunges for anything like resetting your brain.
No, I've never seen that.
No.
Interesting. It's an interesting thing. It is true that hot water, for example, does reset your brain too. Mm. So taking a shower, for example, with hot water. I mean, we always say we get our best creative ideas in the shower. Well, we really do, because it resets your brain and lets it kind of, doesn't really reset it. It's like pushing a red button on the side of your head, but it just kind of resets everything the way it was before you got crazy and started doing all sorts of stuff. And there's lots of ways, and it doesn't take much time to reset your brain, but it has to be done often enough that it gives your brain a chance.
I don't know how much you know about that study you were telling us about, but are they trying to take away the use at times to see if that thinning starts to thicken?
No, they're just, what they're doing, which I think is smart, is they're just monitoring. It's basically an observational study over time.
Okay.
They may at some point start doing other things with it, but they haven't yet. And the reason is because they collect a lot of data, paper and pencil data. If you've ever had an MRI, that's not an easy thing to do. And scanning MRIs on kids, I mean, don't move. Okay, I won't move. It's very time consuming. And so, like I said, I think they have 12 universities around the world doing this, and they're getting data, but slowly. And my suspicion is that they make the data available, by the way, to anybody who wants it. And my suspicion is that people will start looking at that and see if they can detect any reasons why those kids who did what they were doing more of that caused it to thin, and what they were doing less of. So I have high hopes that they'll come up with something good. But all of this is leading to the idea that you can now use very good analytical tools that aren't paper and pencil. Mm. And we use this device called a FNIR, a functional near-infrared spectroscopy. We wrap around somebody's forehead, and it measures the blood flow in 16 areas in your forehead. And right behind your forehead is what's called the prefrontal cortex. And it's your decision maker, your attention focus, multitask focus, everything. And so it can tell you if somebody's focusing a lot now, or if they're whatever, not what they're doing, but what their brain is doing. And it measures blood flow because blood brings oxygen and glucose to the neurons, which they need to live and to spark and to do things. But we also use very simple gadgets, little things you can put on somebody's finger that measures their galvanic skin response. Galvanic skin response is just sweat on your finger. Mm. But it's correlated highly with arousal. So the higher the galvanic skin response, the more aroused you are. And I'll give you an example of it. We did this as a full study, but on my website, right at the top, it says, watch a 60 Minutes piece with Anderson Cooper. So we brought Anderson Cooper into the lab, and my colleague Nancy Cheever did this study, which then she published later on. And we told him, we're going to sit you down at this screen, and you're going to see a video, and we're going to test you on it when you're done. Simple, right? And we said, just put your phone next to you over here. It's fine. And then we clipped on both heart rate and galvanic skin response. The heart rate is irrelevant; it never shows anything. But the galvanic skin response is interesting. So after a minute or two, Dr. Cheever would go, wait. Sorry, but your phone is interrupting these little things that are on your fingers. So we're just going to put it behind you on a table back here. It'll be fine. And then she texted him 4 times. Every time she texted him, galvanic skin response, galvanic skin response, arousal. Wow. And we chatted afterwards, and he was real honest with it. He said, yeah, I was worried about who was texting me. I was worried about whether it was important and I was missing out on something. Yes, I was anxious. And then it's really funny, when he interviewed me, at some point, he was sitting in a chair and he put his phone down by his foot, and he stopped and said, you know what? I didn't hear what you just said because I was thinking about my phone down on my foot and wondering what I was missing out on.
No way.
That's crazy.
And then the interesting thing is, Nancy brought in a journalist from Good Morning America, I think, and he brought 2 teenage girls with him. And the teenage girls, whereas the journalists spiked like this, the teenage girls spiked like this. Oh. Just obviously anxious. That's arousal, is anxiety. It could be positive. I mean, arousal can be positive or negative, but mostly that's anxiety. And you just see how anxious people get if they can't touch their phone. If they can't touch that phone right then, they get very anxious. And you see people going around patting their pocket. You ever see that?
Oh, yeah.
Just to make sure the phone's there.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah.
I do that sometimes.
Pull out their phone. You see people pull out their phone and look at it thinking that they just got a text or something because it vibrated, but it didn't vibrate. They had the normal tingling in their leg, but they called it vibration, but it's really phantom. It's a phantom process.
Okay.
Phantom vibration syndrome. But you see that often. So you see people actually, if you watch where people carry their phones, when phones first started, as an exercise in futility, I would have my students go out and watch where people had their phones. Just kind of observe for 15 minutes, stand someplace and watch people go by. First of all, at the beginning, people weren't necessarily on their phones all the time, but they could see that their phone, for women, it was mostly in their purse. And for guys, it was mostly in their pocket. Sometimes put away in a backpack. As time went on, first of all, more people were on their phone until everybody was on their phone when they were watching. What was interesting is where they put their phone. Women started putting it in the bra, top of their bra, so they feel that vibration right there. Guys, people would hold their phone. And if you look around, most people now hold their phone no matter what they're doing. Their phone is in their hand all the time. That's nuts. Why is it? Because they want to feel that vibration and immediately be able to grab it. And it takes too long to go into their pocket and pick it up. And it's like they just want that immediacy. And that's the lethality of all the technology, because it's not designed to do this to us, but it is doing it to us. And it's not the technology, it's us. We're doing it to ourselves. And somehow we have to wean ourselves off of this. And when you asked about the ways to reset your brain, one of the things that I really like to do is to help people increase their focus time, which is kind of a way of resetting your brain. And I teach them something called a tech break. So if, for example, it's a teenager and they're studying biology, and they're supposed to read this page and answer some questions, what I will have them do is set their alarm for 1 minute, look at anything on their screens. I have multiple screens here, so anything on their screens, on their phones, on their iPad. After 1 minute, get rid of everything that they don't need. So shut it down if it's on a computer. Don't minimize it because it's still sitting down there at the bottom yelling at you when their new message comes up. Flick off all the apps on your phone. Set your phone for 15 minutes, the alarm for 15 minutes. Turn it to silent. Turn it upside down and put it right in front of you. Now, why put it close? I mean, people always say, why can't you just put it in the other room? Won't it be fine? No, out of sight where the phone is not out of mind. They're thinking about it all the time when it's not there. I mean, we've got studies to show that. But it's in front of you to remind your brain that in 15 minutes or less, you will be able to look at whatever you want. Alarm goes off in 15 minutes. You set it for 1 minute. Look at whatever you want for 1 minute. It turns out it's enough time to return a bunch of text messages, to check a couple social media sites. Then again, 15 minutes, 1 minute, 15 minutes, 1 minute. When the 15-minute bell rings and you go, wait, I got to finish this page. I want to finish this. Now change it to 20 minutes, and then 25, and then 30. And if I can get you up to a short break, 1 to 2 minutes before, and 30 minutes of focus, and 1 to 2 minutes after, I've won. Because now you have a 30-minute focus, which is pretty impressive in our day and age.
Yeah.
In our day and age, yeah.
Works incredibly well, but you also have to tell everybody else that you're doing this. Because when I first started doing this, I didn't say that. And then people were going, well, it would work fine if people just didn't keep texting me and wondering why I'm not picking up my phone, and then start yelling at me because I'm ignoring them. So you have to tell all your friends, look, I'm trying this thing to increase my focus. I'll get back to you within a half hour.
That's good.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of stuff.
It does really work. And by the way, you can do it at the dinner table too.
No.
Everybody put their phone, check everything, put their phones away. And 30 minutes, give them a 2, 3, 4 minute tech break. If you're watching a TV show with the kids, pause it, do the same thing. Because otherwise their brain's always thinking about where their phone is and what's on it.
So interesting. And it's good that we have these tools so we can separate from technology. But when I want to get your opinion about this, we're getting into the age where Neuralink might be a thing, and there's no separation anymore, and you're combined with technology. What are your thoughts on Neuralink and the fact that we could always be online and you don't have this separation of man and device?
My honest opinion is that will be almost like the end of the world. Because the most important thing that makes us human is communication. And if we're constantly on there, we're getting overloaded with communication. It's just, if I had my brain have a device implanted in there that had the internet on it all the time, I would get crazy after a day, because I get 100 emails a day. And so they'd be popping into my head all the time. Now I just check my phone often anyway, but nonetheless, they'd be coming instantly. Boom, boom, boom. And that has to be disruptive, first of all, but also just anxiety provoking beyond belief. What is that? What is that? And then you flick something in your brain and it reads the message to you. And then you just want more. And then you got this problem of, how do you disconnect from it? And in essence, if that's the way the world goes, I don't see how we'll ever disconnect from it, because it's ubiquitous then. It's implanted essentially in your brain. There's some good things you can implant in your brain, but
not
necessarily your phone.
Yeah. Another topic, like we're talking about technology, another byproduct of technology, and I don't know if you've done any research on it, but like blue light, what you were talking about earlier, there's like blue light emitting glasses that you can kind of combat the blue light and stop those cortisol effects. But a big thing that people are getting into is EMF protection, like in their rooms, their clothes, trying to get away from the signals from electronics. What do you think about that? Do you think that's all hocus pocus, or?
Over the years, it's funny because I was trying to think when you're bringing this up, but I think it was about 20 years ago that there was a big scare that holding your phone next to your ear was going to give you a brain tumor, because a couple people got brain tumors. Well, they've studied that over decades. Not true. You don't need to put tinfoil all over yourself. You don't need to get a Faraday box to put all your technology in so it doesn't leak out and get at you. Yes, we are all part of a big experiment, but it has nothing to do with having your phone there. If you think about it, if there's somebody in this next room and they text me, and then they're talking on the phone to other people and they're texting other people, all that just flies through the air. How does it get from point 1 to point 2? It flies through the air essentially. And so you're constantly being bombarded by electromagnetic radiation. Constantly. If you can imagine this, if you're sitting in a classroom or in a meeting or anything, and everybody's got their phone going all at the same time, basically, if you could put on glasses that just showed you where all the transmissions were, it would be black because it would just cover everything. So right in the middle, and I've said this many times over the years, we're in the middle of a weird global experiment. We have no idea what it's going to do. We're pretty sure that it's not going to cause brain tumors. Pretty sure, but we're never 100% sure. But we don't know if, for example, it's going to change the biochemistry of our brain over time. It certainly seems like with the kids in the ABCD study, it's doing something, but it's not the EMF. It's the overuse, but then you can kind of infer that it might be the electromagnetic radiation. Bottom line, we're not going to know for another 50 years. I mean, because really people have been carrying their phone around for about 12 years, really. I mean, full-time, 24/7, 365. And that's not long enough to do a study, a good study looking at environmental effects. And besides which, there's so many other effects that could cause this stuff. I mean, chemicals in the food you eat and chemicals in the grass that you mow. And there's all this stuff out there. How do you disentangle what's due to the electromagnetic frequencies and what's due to other stuff? You can't. It's very difficult. Same thing. I have Parkinson's disease, and I have some weird Parkinson's symptoms that are cognitive, that are in my brain, like forgetting things, not remembering walking downstairs, not remembering what I'm there for. But is that aging, or is that Parkinson's? I don't know. Probably both. But it's so hard to disentangle it. I can't just look at research on me as a Parkinson's patient and say, well, I'm going to go without my phones for a while and see if I get better. That's not going to work. So there's always alternative explanations for all of this. And there's nothing about technology that I've ever seen that is 100% proven, shown. They've tried. I mean, there's some pretty close literature on gaming and the effects it has on the brain, but still not 100%. Still fight about it all the time. We just don't know. I mean, we're living in a grand experiment, and we're the subjects, we're the mice in there.
The aliens are rolling over us.
Yeah.
I think we are the aliens, unfortunately.
Oh man. Yeah, you were talking about the brain tumor theory in the beginning, and now it's like everybody's afraid of 5G because of it's a different frequency that we're not used to using. And I think I don't know if you know, it's a frequency that's related to something else. I think that was what the scare was. It was this.
I think there's some research on it that it's used in medical stuff. And
okay.
It can cause some medical problems. They found a few. It's still, I cringe whenever I see people quote stuff like that. That's because it's very small studies and very wide conclusions.
I have this theory that like social media technology in general is making us more dumber in a way to do things. I've said this 100 times on the podcast, but your generation, my dad's generation, older folks, they knew how to do stuff manually with their hands and fix stuff. And if the world were to come to an end and we didn't have technology, no one would know how to do anything to actually survive long term.
I mean, because the answer to any question of how you do something is Google it.
Right. Yeah. And
there's always a YouTube video for that.
And men are getting a little more feminized today, spending more time inside on their phone, not doing, using air quotes here, but doing manly stuff. I feel that's my theory. What do you think about that at all? With us not being as manual intentioned as we were back in, I guess, the golden era, the industrial age?
I think that it's always been a problem. It's not a new problem. It's always been a problem. And particularly now that you have, essentially you're carrying an infinite powerful computer in your pocket, or in your bra strap, depending upon where you carry it, you are prone to take the easy way out. And quite honestly, if I want to, fix something, I'll Google it, find a YouTube video, watch the video, and do it. Could I learn it on my own? Sure, I could. Could I figure it out? Sure, I could. But why should I? It's right. The solution's right there. But the problem is that then things that you could have done, maybe something you could have fixed something, you go, well, it's just easier to do with a video. And so you start relying on that. And that's when we have problems. Once you start relying on the technology to basically stand for you and your brain and what you're doing, yes, your brain's going to go into a state of kind of disuse in some sense. And there's not a lot of data on this, but I think over time, we know that over time your attention span has decreased enormously. That's technologically driven. We know that your memory has disappeared a lot because you can always Google it. We are constantly asking, who's that star going out with? And it's like, we must have looked 10 times on the same person, because when you get the answer in your brain needs, if you're going to remember it, your brain needs to process it. If it doesn't process it, it doesn't remember it. It goes in and out. So that's what's happening more and more, is that our brains are getting used to not processing stuff deeply enough that we can remember it, and just ejecting it, and knowing that we can find it the next time. It's called the Google effect, by the way.
Google effect.
There really is a Google effect.
Yeah, it's like with directions, like you don't know where to drive anymore because you're mapping everything, even places because you're trying to look out for traffic or whatever. Do you think that this overload, like the new what is it called, endless swipe, just very intense media that really doesn't have any meaning, do you think all that data is going in your brain and getting rid of useful data? Because it's going in, and
I don't think you're processing it long enough to make it any difference.
You think it's just trashing it?
It's like a flick. It's like a flit across your brain. Our brains are really good at remembering things, but we have to process them. We have to spend time getting our neurons to process it over and over, which, by the way, that also happens during our sleep. That stuff that happened during the day, our brain processes the stuff we want to keep and throws out the stuff we don't want. It's called pruning. And pruning is throwing out the stuff we don't want. Consolidation is the stuff of what happens in the middle of the night. If you're getting a lousy night's sleep, of course, that doesn't happen. And so stuff that you studied right up to bedtime might be gone by the time you get up in the morning. I don't think there's a great book written a long time ago by Thomas Kuhn called The Paradigm Shift. And what it does is basically set up the idea that we're in these paradigms, and at some point something happens and we make a shift somewhere else to a different paradigm or an abstraction of that paradigm. And I think that this is where we are right now, that we're at the point where we're certainly in an overload, overuse, carry your phone paradigm. And then the question becomes, what's next? And I'm not a futurist. I can't predict things very well. And when I try, I fall down on my face. But I would guess that the next shift is going to have to be something like implanting stuff. That the next kind of generation going to be driven by biological stuff, by things that tap your brain. And we already see some of that, the 23andMe kind of things. Those are biological, very popular. Ancestry, very biological. We see that, there's more and more biological information out there about us. And I think that's where things are going to start shifting to. And I think one of the problems is what you said, is that we're not going to be able to have the time to process things. And the downside, of course, of that is we don't remember them without processing them again. The good news is when you start to process something again that you've had before, if it got down a little bit, it kind of reignites that area and helps you. You don't have to do it from scratch. You just kind of build it up and build it up again. Same thing with distraction. Your brain's funny with distraction. When your brain's, like, if I'm thinking about something right now, my brain can look at it as if my brain is activated and the neurons are flaring out there. But then if I get distracted, wait, something over there, the blood that's there energizing the neurons with glucose and oxygen now starts to shift to a new idea, maybe over here, and this one goes down and this one goes up. But this goes down slowly so that we get back to it, say within 15, 20 minutes, it's not gone. It's just that we have to re-energize it, and we re-energize it not from scratch, but from what little memory we did process. Distractions. I mean, we're living in a world of distraction right now. Yeah. My phone, by the way, just beeped, and on my screen it tells me notifications that I get.
Oh no!
And it just told me that in 30 minutes I have to walk across the street to get my haircut.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, Dr. Rosen. We appreciate the time. It's been a fascinating conversation, and we enjoy the work that you do and that you did and you continue to do. If there's one golden rule that you tell your family about technology and mental health or psychology, what's that thing that you can share with people?
Make sure that you're controlling the technology and the technology is not controlling you. I think too often we let the technology control us, and we make the mistake of checking in too often. And then we leave notifications on for everything. I always tell people, turn off all your notifications. What do you care if somebody just posted something on TikTok? What do you care? You're going to look at TikTok in 20 minutes anyway, next time you open your phone. So yes, let you control the technology. Don't let the technology control you. And I think if we start working on that, we've got a chance. Agreed.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Dr. Rosen. You have a good day, and we'll let you know when this bad boy comes out.
Nice to chat with you guys.
Nice. You have a good day. Enjoy your haircut.
Yep.
Talk to you later. Bye.